Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. Have you ever picked up a stranger in the dead of night, only to wish you had? The neon lights of Las Vegas faded behind me as I drove along the empty highway. It was late and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the asphalt. I could feel the weight of solitude pressing down on me, the isolation of the open road at night. As I drove, my mind wandered. I thought about the whirlwind of bright lights and loud music I had just left behind. It had been exhilarating, but now, in the quiet of my car, the excitement felt like a distant memory. The hum of the engine was almost hypnotic, lulling me into a state of calm until I saw him, a figure standing by the roadside, thumb outstretched. It was a moment of hesitation. I could easily keep driving, pretend I didn't see him. But something compelled me to stop. Maybe it was the loneliness, or perhaps a flicker of compassion. I pulled over, my heart racing slightly as I watched him approach. He was tall and lean, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans that looked slightly worn. His face was shadowed, but I could make out a pair of piercing eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I could use a ride." I nodded, gesturing for him to get in. As he settled into the passenger seat, I felt a strange unease settle in my stomach. I tried to shake it off. It was just the nighttime paranoia creeping in. After all, I was the one who had invited him into my car. We drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the tires on the road and the soft music playing on the radio. I stole glances at him. He seemed lost in thought, staring out the window into the dark abyss outside. "What brings you out here?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He turned his gaze to me, and for a moment the air felt electric. "Just trying to get home," he replied cryptically. There was something unsettling in his tone, a weight to his words that made my skin crawl. I felt a chill in the air, a sudden drop in temperature that seemed to seep through the windows. I shook my head, blaming it on the late hour. We continued driving, the landscape passing by in a blur of darkness. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we approached a stretch of desolate highway, I heard it, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze rustling through the trees. I glanced at him, but he remained still, his eyes fixed ahead. The whisper grew louder, almost like a voice calling out. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, fear, or perhaps recognition. "Ignore it," he said firmly. "Just keep driving." His tone was sharp, almost commanding. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. With every mile, the tension in the car thickened. I felt his presence beside me, heavy and consuming. It was as if the shadows had come alive, wrapping around us like a cloak of dread. The whisper transformed into a cacophony, voices overlapping, calling out in desperation. I fought against the rising panic, focusing on the road. But the shadows seemed to dance in my peripheral vision, twisting and shifting as if alive. I glanced at him again, and my breath caught in my throat. He was staring at me, a strange intensity in his gaze. "Just keep driving," he repeated, but his voice was different now, lower, almost sinister. The words sent a jolt of fear through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was not who he appeared to be. Then, as if summoned by my dread, the whispering reached a fever pitch. The voices rose and fell, intertwining into a chilling symphony of chaos. I felt the grip of panic tightening around my chest, threatening to suffocate me. "What's happening?" I gasped, glancing at the speedometer, 70 miles per hour. And just like that, he vanished. One moment he was there, and the next, he dissolved into the air as if he had never existed. The passenger seat was empty, the faintest imprint where he had sat still lingering. My heart raced, a pounding drum in the silence that engulfed the car. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The car skidded to a halt, and I was left alone, surrounded by the oppressive darkness of the night. What just happened? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, an illusion, a trick of the mind. But there was nothing. Just the vast emptiness of the road and the haunting whispers that faded into the night. I was terrified, alone. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I tried to process what had just occurred. Had I truly picked up a stranger, or had I invited something far more sinister into my life? The road stretched before me, endless and unforgiving, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing down, suffocating me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I was still on the highway, still alive. But the fear gnawed at me, and I knew deep down that whatever I had encountered on this dark road was far from over. The journey had just begun, and I was about to discover just how treacherous the night could be. I sat there, frozen, heart pounding like a war drum in the stillness. The highway stretched endlessly before me, an unyielding ribbon of blackness under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The shadows seemed to close in, thickening around the car like a heavy fog, whispering secrets I could not decipher. What had just happened? My mind raced as I replayed the encounter. The stranger had been real, hadn't he? I glanced at the passenger seat, still hoping to find some trace of him. The leather was cool, untouched, devoid of any sign that a living being had occupied it mere moments ago. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. I needed to get moving. Sitting here wouldn't solve anything. As I shifted into drive, I could feel the weight of the night pressing down, as if the very air was saturated with an unseen force. The engine purred to life, but the quiet hum felt more like a warning than a comfort. I turned the radio back on, hoping to drown out the unsettling silence, but the static buzzed, a cacophony of noise that only amplified my anxiety. I fiddled with the knobs, searching for a familiar station, anything to anchor me in reality. Then through the static I heard it, a voice, faint yet unmistakable. Help me. My heart skipped a beat. Was I imagining things? I quickly turned the volume up, straining to catch the words. Help me, it echoed again, clearer this time, a soft plea that chilled me to the bone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him sitting there, but it was just darkness, swallowing everything whole. I had to get out of here. I pressed down on the accelerator, feeling the car surge forward. The highway began to blur, the white lines streaking past like a river of light. But with every mile, the feeling of unease grew heavier, pressing against my chest. It was as if the shadows were reaching for me, desperate to pull me back into their depths. As I drove, my mind wandered back to the encounter. I remembered his eyes, the way they seemed to pierce through me, seeing something I was not ready to confront. There was a weight to his presence that lingered, a sense of foreboding that settled deep within my bones. The whispering began again, rising from the depths of my memory like smoke curling into the air. "You shouldn't have stopped," it seemed to say. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white against the dark leather. My heart raced and my breathing quickened as I fought to shake off the dread coiling around me. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as I fought to maintain control. The car skidded to a stop just inches from the figure, a deer, eyes wide and frightened, frozen in the headlights. It bolted into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I exhaled, the breath I didn't realize I was holding rushing out in a shudder. My heart was still pounding, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. But the encounter felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of how fragile life could be, and I was left alone on this lonely stretch of road. As I resumed my drive, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was already past midnight. The minutes dragged on and the shadows deepened, warping the familiar landscape into something strange and threatening. I began to question the reality around me, feeling as if the world was slowly shifting, the boundaries of reality blurring. With each mile, the anxiety coiled tighter. My thoughts raced between rationality and paranoia. Could it have been a hallucination? Some kind of trick my mind was playing on me. But deep down, I knew it was real. The sensation of his presence was still fresh in my memory, as tangible as the leather beneath my fingertips. Then I saw it, a flicker in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I caught a glimpse of a figure, pale and ghostly, sitting in the back seat. My breath caught in my throat. I whipped my head around, but the seat was empty. Just a trick of the light. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine. I was not alone. I could almost feel the weight of eyes upon me, a presence that clung to the air like a dark shroud. The road ahead stretched out into the darkness, illuminated only by the weak beams of my headlights. The whispers began again, echoing around me, swirling in the air like a storm. "Help me," they chanted, a haunting refrain that echoed in my mind. I pressed down on the accelerator, desperate to escape. The speedometer climbed, but the shadows seemed to keep pace, always just out of sight. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around the car like fingers reaching out, grasping, pulling me back into the void. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A fleeting figure darting along the roadside. Was it him? My heart raced as I struggled to keep my focus on the road. No, this can't be happening, I thought, fighting against the rising tide of panic. Suddenly my headlights illuminated a sign, Las Vegas, 50 miles. I felt a rush of relief. I was almost there, but something deep inside warned me that I wasn't safe yet. I could almost hear the whispers again, louder now, a chorus of despair that threatened to drown me. I turned my head, peering into the darkness behind me, half expecting to see him again. Just keep driving, I whispered to myself, desperate to escape the feeling of being hunted. But the whispering grew louder, a chaotic chorus of voices weaving through the night. Help us! Help us, they cried, and I felt the chill creep back in, wrapping around me like a vice. I needed to get away. I needed to break free from this nightmare. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, and the car surged forward into the abyss, the shadows closing in. Would I escape this encounter, or was I forever marked by the night? The night held its secrets close, and I was about to discover just how deep the darkness ran. The asphalt blurred beneath me as I accelerated, the speedometer creeping closer to 80 miles per hour. My heart raced in time with the engine, a thundering drumbeat that filled the car with an electric tension. Each passing mile felt like a countdown, a reminder that I was still ensnared in the web of this surreal night. I forced myself to focus, squinting into the darkness that surrounded me. The highway was devoid of life, the occasional flicker of headlights from oncoming cars the only sign that the world continued beyond my own little bubble of fear. I needed to escape this feeling, this sensation of being hunted by something I couldn't see. But the whispers persisted, their echoes clawing at my sanity. Help us, the plea became a chant, reverberating through the air, threading its way into my thoughts. I shook my head violently, as if the physical act could dispel the haunting words. They burrowed deeper, gnawing at my resolve, feeding my growing dread. A sudden thud against the side of the car jolted me from my thoughts. I swerved instinctively, gripping the wheel tightly. My breath hitched and my eyes darted to the side mirror. Nothing, just the endless expanse of darkness. I took a moment to calm my racing heart, convincing myself it was just the wind or a branch, but the unease settled back like a heavy fog. I glanced at the digital clock again, 1:27 a.m. The world outside seemed to warp under the weight of the night. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the road, twisting in grotesque shapes that felt almost sentient. The quiet hum of the tires on the road turned into a low, ominous growl, echoing the rising tide of fear in my chest. I turned the radio back on, desperate to drown out the whispers that clawed at the edges of my mind. Static crackled through the speakers, an unsettling reminder of the chaos just beneath the surface. Suddenly a song broke through, a familiar tune that pulled at my heartstrings, but the melody twisted and warped, the lyrics becoming distorted and unrecognizable. As I tried to make sense of it, I caught another flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. My heart raced again, but this time I was ready. I turned my head, focusing on the road behind me. I could have sworn I saw a figure standing by the roadside, a ghostly silhouette outlined against the dark landscape, watching. A scream tore itself from my throat, but I bit it back, forcing myself to breathe. You're imagining things, I told myself. It's just the darkness playing tricks, but deep down, I felt the gnawing fear that there was more to it than that. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but the darkness seemed to thicken like a living entity, pressing against the car, trying to seep through the windows. My mind raced, envisioning every horror I'd ever heard about those lonely stretches of highway. What if I wasn't alone? What if the figure was not just a figment of my imagination, but something far worse? Then, just as I thought I was calming down, the passenger seat creaked. My breath hitched again. I glanced over, half expecting to see the stranger, but the seat was empty, still and quiet. I shook my head, willing the creeping dread to fade. "Keep it together," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I needed to focus on the road, on getting home. Then the headlights caught something up ahead. A sign loomed, its reflective surface glimmering in the glow. Las Vegas, 20 miles. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by another wave of panic. As I glanced back at the road, I saw it again, movement in the rearview mirror, a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I glanced at the passenger seat again, the emptiness mocking my growing terror. I could almost hear the whispers again, louder this time, swirling in my mind, urging me to stop, to look, to understand. "Help us," they pleaded, a haunting refrain that echoed in my soul. My pulse quickened, the pressure building in my chest until it felt like I might burst. The fear was suffocating, the kind that grips you in the dark and makes you doubt your sanity. I took a deep breath, attempting to ground myself. "It's just fatigue," I muttered. "I'm tired." "Just keep driving." The road was starting to blur, the lines melding together as I fought against the heaviness in my eyelids. But with every mile, the unease crept back, coiling tighter around my mind. Then, as if the night had been waiting for the right moment, the engine sputtered. A jolt of panic shot through me as I glanced down at the fuel gauge. It hovered just above empty. How could this be happening? I had just filled the tank before leaving the city. The whispers grew louder, swirling in a chaotic cacophony. "You shouldn't have stopped." My heart raced as I tried to process this new threat. I had to find a gas station, and quickly. I glanced at the side roads that branched off from the main highway, but they were swallowed in darkness, the outlines of the trees looming like sentinels. Suddenly my headlights caught something moving in the distance, a flickering light. A gas station. Relief surged through me, mixing with the undercurrent of anxiety. I quickly turned off the main road, tires crunching over gravel as I approached the dimly lit station. As I pulled up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The station appeared abandoned, the flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air wrapping around me like a shroud. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the silence, reverberating into the void. The only response was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I approached the pump, hoping to fill my tank and escape this nightmare. But as I fumbled for my wallet, I heard it again, the whispering. "Help us," it was coming from behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but the station was empty. The shadows seemed to deepen, twisting and writhing in the corners of my vision. My pulse quickened as I returned to the car, desperation clawing at my insides. I had to leave. I had to get out of here. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine coughed and sputtered, refusing to cooperate. Panic surged anew. The whispers rose to a crescendo, echoing in my ears. "Help us! Help us!" I banged my fists against the steering wheel, frustration boiling over. "What do you want from me?" I yelled into the void, feeling utterly powerless. But the night held its secrets tight, the darkness swallowing my cries. Then, through the chaos, a figure stepped into the glow of the headlights. I froze, blood running cold. It was him, the stranger from before. He stood there calm and unyielding, as if he had never left. "Get out," he said, his voice smooth, almost melodic, but laced with something darker. "It's time to help." The whispers swirled around me, a symphony of despair. I was trapped between the world of the living and the unknown, and I could feel the weight of the night closing in. What had I gotten myself into? The stranger stood there, an ethereal presence illuminated by the flickering lights of the gas station. His face was pale, almost luminous, with sharp features that seemed to shift in the dim glow. My heart pounded violently in my chest as I stared at him, caught between fear and an inexplicable urge to approach. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, the gravel crunching under his feet like dry leaves. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was rooted in place, unable to turn away. The whispers grew louder, a dissonant chorus echoing in my mind, feeding the growing terror. "Help us! Help us! I can show you," he said finally, his voice smooth yet chilling. "You can help us all." The air around me seemed to thicken, swirling with an oppressive weight. "Who are us?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" His expression shifted, sadness flickering across his features, but there was something unnerving about it, something that felt predatory. "Those who lost their way. Those who wander between worlds." In that moment I felt it, a pulse of energy, a connection to something beyond the physical realm. I could almost see them, trapped figures in the shadows behind him, their eyes wide with desperation. Panic surged through me, urging me to flee, but my body felt heavy, as if the night had conspired to hold me in place. "Help us," the stranger repeated, extending a hand towards me. "You have the power to free them." A deep chill wrapped around me, and I took a step back, shaking my head. "I can't. I don't even know what you mean." He stepped forward again, closing the distance, and for a fleeting second I felt a flicker of empathy for him. His eyes glistened, filled with an otherworldly sorrow. But as he came closer, the warmth of his presence was eclipsed by the coldness of the surrounding darkness. "Please," he said, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "You must listen. They're trapped in this limbo, lost and suffering. You're the only one who can see us. You have to help." The whispers intensified, drowning out my thoughts. "Help us," they cried, a cacophony of voices that felt suffocating. I clutched my head, desperate to block it out, to reclaim my sanity. "No," I shouted, feeling the panic rise again. "I'm not your savior. I can't do this." But the shadows around him flickered, pulsating like living creatures, closing in on me. The weight of their anguish pressed against my chest, suffocating me. I could feel their eyes on me, begging, pleading. "Help us! Help us!" The stranger's gaze turned intense, his expression shifting from sorrow to something darker. "You must help. You've already begun the journey." I felt a tremor of fear coursing through me. "What do you mean?" His lips curled into a slight, unsettling smile. "You picked me up, didn't you? You opened the door. Now you must see this through." A wave of confusion washed over me. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't want to be part of some twisted nightmare. I took another step back, but he advanced, the shadows swirling around him like smoke. Every choice has a consequence, he murmured. You can't turn back now. The fear clawed at my insides, threatening to swallow me whole. I needed to escape, to run, but my legs felt glued to the ground. The lights of the gas station flickered violently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. It felt like the very fabric of reality was unraveling around me. Please, I begged, my voice trembling. I don't want to be part of this. I just want to go home. Home, he echoed, tilting his head, a look of curiosity flickering across his face. What if home isn't what you think it is? What if you were meant for something greater? A swell of desperation surged within me. I don't care about greatness. I just want to live. The shadows shifted, and I caught glimpses of anguished faces swirling within them, their mouths moving, trapped in silent screams. My heart raced, a mix of horror and empathy flooding my senses. What happened to them? I whispered, barely able to contain the dread creeping up my spine. They trusted. They believed. And now they're lost, he said softly, a hint of regret in his voice. But you can help them find peace. You have the power. I shook my head vehemently, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. No, I can't help. I won't. Suddenly the atmosphere shifted, the shadows closing in tighter around us. The gas station flickered once more, and the air grew heavy with a palpable tension. I felt the ground beneath me shift, the reality bending as if the very essence of the night was tearing apart. Time is running out, he said, urgency lacing his voice. If you don't act now, you'll be lost with them. With that, the world spun, and the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The gas station blurred into a swirl of lights and darkness, and I felt myself being pulled into the vortex of despair that surrounded the stranger. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let myself be consumed by this madness. I couldn't succumb to the shadows that threatened to drag me down. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted back to my car, heart pounding in my chest. The engine sputtered, but I didn't have time to hesitate. I slammed the door shut, fumbling with the key. The whispers followed me, shrieking in my ears, but I gritted my teeth and turned the key again. The engine roared to life, drowning out the cacophony. I pressed the accelerator, the tires screeching as I tore away from the gas station. As I sped down the highway, the shadows receded into the night behind me, but I could still feel their weight, their haunting presence lingering like a nightmare just out of reach. I glanced back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the stranger again, but the road was empty. Just darkness stretching endlessly behind me. But I knew better. I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, reminding me of the choice I'd made, the choice to drive away instead of helping. And deep down, I feared that the consequences were just beginning to unfold. I pressed on, the road ahead uncertain and shrouded in darkness, my heart racing with the knowledge that I couldn't escape what I had encountered. The night was far from over, and I could feel the eyes of the shadows watching my every move. The highway stretched endlessly before me, an unbroken ribbon of asphalt illuminated only by my headlights. Shadows flitted along the edges of the road, playing tricks on my mind. Every flicker of movement sent jolts of fear through my veins. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. As I drove, the echoes of the stranger's voice and the desperate whispers of the trapped souls filled my mind. "You can help us," his words haunted me like a dark specter, and with each passing mile, the weight of my decision pressed heavier on my conscience. I forced myself to focus on the road, my heart racing in sync with the pulsating fear that enveloped me. The night felt alive, buzzing with energy, and it became increasingly clear that I was not alone. The sensation of being watched returned, more pronounced now. I could almost feel the eyes of the shadows piercing through the darkness, following my every move. Suddenly the radio crackled to life, breaking the oppressive silence. The static buzzed loudly, and for a moment I thought I heard voices beneath the noise. I flicked the knob to change the station, but the whispers grew louder, merging with the static. "Help us! Help us!" Panic surged within me. I slammed my hand against the radio, silencing it, but the voices persisted in my mind. I could feel my grip on reality slipping, the tension in my chest tightening like a vice. I needed to escape this nightmare, but there was nowhere to run. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, revealing a strange shape in the distance. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was a figure standing at the side of the highway. I slowed down, squinting into the darkness. As I approached, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a woman. Her face was pale and gaunt, eyes wide with fear. She raised her hand, pleading, "Please help me." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to drive away, to leave this nightmare behind. But the desperation in her voice pierced through my fear. I couldn't ignore her. I pulled over, heart racing, the engine humming ominously in the quiet of the night. "Get in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She opened the door and slipped into the passenger seat, her presence adding an unsettling weight to the air. "Thank you," she gasped, looking back down the road as if something was pursuing her. "I thought I was lost forever." "What happened?" I asked, trying to gauge her state of mind. "Are you okay?" Her gaze flicked nervously around the car. "They're coming for me. They're all around." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who's coming?" "The ones who lost their way," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The same ones you saw. The stranger, he's not what he seems." Fear gripped me and I clenched the wheel tighter. "What do you mean?" She looked me dead in the eyes, her expression serious. "He's a lure. They feed on fear. Once you see them, they never let go." My heart raced as I recalled the stranger's words and the faces in the shadows. But I left. I drove away. "You can't escape them," she replied, her voice urgent. "They know you now. You're marked." I shook my head, trying to dismiss her words. "No, I'm fine. I'll be fine." But even as I said it, I felt the truth of her statement creeping into my thoughts. The whispers had never truly left me. They lingered like an ominous cloud. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the stranger's pale face looming behind me, but the road was empty. "Where are you headed?" she asked, breaking the tense silence. "I just want to get home," I replied, my voice strained. "I thought I could escape this night." "Home is not safe anymore," she said softly, her gaze distant. You must confront them. It's the only way. Confront them. The very thought filled me with dread. I could feel the shadows gathering at the edges of my consciousness, waiting for the moment I would falter. What do you mean? You have to go back, she insisted, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. You have to face what you saw. If you don't, they will come for you. They will take you. I shook my head in denial. No, I can't go back there. I won't. Then you'll never be free, she said, her eyes boring into mine, filled with a mix of fear and pity. The only way to help them is to help yourself. The weight of her words crashed over me, heavy and suffocating. I glanced at the road ahead, my mind racing. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't live in fear of what I had encountered. What if I go back, I whispered, the thought horrifying yet strangely liberating. What if I confront him? She nodded slowly. You have to reclaim your power. Only then will they leave you alone. I could feel the tension in the air shift, a fragile hope mingling with the dread. It was terrifying, the idea of turning back, but I knew I couldn't keep running. Okay, I said, my voice steadier now. I'll do it. I'll go back. As I made the decision, a strange calmness washed over me. The whispers faded slightly, the darkness feeling less suffocating. I took a deep breath and turned the car around, heading back toward the gas station where it all began. The road seemed different now, the shadows less ominous. As I approached the gas station, the lights flickered, casting eerie patterns on the pavement. My heart raced, a mix of fear and determination coursing through my veins. Are you ready? The woman asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I have to be, I replied, the words resonating within me. I'm done living in fear. I parked the car and stepped out, the night air thick with tension. The gas station loomed before me, a monument of dread and uncertainty. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down, but I knew I had to face it. The woman stayed close beside me, her presence both reassuring and unsettling. Together we approached the entrance, the doors creaking open to reveal the dimly lit interior. As we stepped inside, the whispers returned, swirling around us like a tempest. Help us, help us. I squared my shoulders, taking a deep breath. I was ready to confront whatever awaited me in the shadows. I would reclaim my power, even if it meant facing the darkest corners of my fear. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. What if the very shadows you cast had a life of their own? In the heart of Tennessee lies a peculiar park, a hidden gem known to locals as the Branch Figures Gardens. It's a place where twisted branches and curling vines form grotesque shapes, figures that resemble human forms and yet feel more like something out of a nightmare. The park is beautiful by day, bathed in sunlight, but when the sun sets and darkness creeps in, the atmosphere shifts and the figures take on a life of their own. I had always been drawn to the strange allure of the park. My friends and I would wander through its winding paths, laughing and joking, but deep down, a sense of unease tugged at my mind. I often felt like the figures were watching us, their wooden eyes boring into my soul. They were just branches, I told myself, yet something about them felt wrong. That feeling intensified when I heard the stories, the whispers of those who claimed to have seen the figures moving at night. One chilly evening, I decided to investigate the park alone. I needed to confront my fears. The air was crisp and the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the ground. As I approached the entrance, a strange sound caught my attention, a soft rustling like dry leaves skittering across the path. I paused, heart racing. Was someone else here? Or was it just the wind? The path wound deeper into the woods, lined with the grotesque figures. Each one appeared to be frozen in a silent scream, their gnarled limbs twisting in unnatural angles. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I quickened my pace, determined not to let my imagination get the best of me. But as I walked, the rustling grew louder, as if something was keeping pace just behind me. I stopped, turning to look over my shoulder. The park was empty, just me and the shadows. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. It was just my mind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched persisted, creeping over me like a cold fog. A part of me wanted to leave, to turn around and flee, but curiosity pulled me deeper into the darkness. As I walked, I caught a whiff of something strange, a pungent, earthy odor that made my stomach churn. It was a mix of damp soil and something else, something rotten. I glanced around, half expecting to see a decaying creature lurking among the branches. My heart thumped loudly in my chest, echoing in my ears as I continued on. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I spun around, breath hitching in my throat. Nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. Yet as I turned back to the path, I couldn't shake the feeling that one of the figures had shifted, its form slightly altered from where it had stood before. I shook my head, trying to dispel the notion. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself, nothing more. I pressed on, moving deeper into the park. The shadows seemed to thicken, the air growing heavier around me. The only sound was the crunch of twigs beneath my feet and the distant call of an owl. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a gnarled tree, the bark rough against my palm. My eyes wandered back to the figures, and that's when I noticed something unsettling. A figure in the back, its limbs appeared to be twitching ever so slightly. Panic surged within me. I squinted, trying to discern if my mind was playing tricks. But no, it was moving. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, it shifted its position, as if testing the limits of its form. I stumbled back, heart racing, the feeling of being watched intensifying to an unbearable degree. What was happening? My mind raced with possibilities. Was this park haunted? Were the figures somehow alive? I turned to run, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but the path seemed longer, the shadows deeper. I could hear a soft rustling now, a sound that mimicked footsteps following closely behind. Stop it, I shouted, though my voice cracked. This isn't funny, but the darkness offered no reply, only the whisper of leaves in the wind growing louder, more insistent. I sprinted, the branches clawing at my clothes, the figures blurring in my peripheral vision. I couldn't look back. I had to escape whatever was pursuing me. The night air felt suffocating, heavy with an unseen presence. I could feel the figures shifting, their shapes twisting, as if eager to join the chase. With every step I became more frantic, my thoughts spiraling. Was it my imagination? Or had the figures truly come to life? The fear of the unknown clawed at my sanity, pushing me to the edge. Just as I thought I might escape, I felt something brush against my shoulder, a cold, wooden touch that sent ice through my veins. I whirled around, eyes wide, and that's when I saw it. A figure, its limbs long and gnarled, was reaching out toward me, its wooden fingers trembling. I stumbled back, breathless, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The moonlight flickered off its surface, highlighting the twisted details of its form, a grotesque mimicry of humanity. Panic surged. I turned and ran blindly, the world around me blurring. I had to get away. The shadows felt alive, closing in, the whispers growing louder, taunting me. In my frantic escape, I crashed through the underbrush, the sounds of the park morphing into chaos. Then the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell, plummeting into darkness. I fell, the world above disappearing in a rush of leaves and branches, the air rushing past me like a frigid wind. It felt as if time had stretched, each second an eternity. Panic surged through me as I braced for impact, my body colliding with something soft yet unyielding. I landed with a thud, gasping for breath as pain shot through my shoulder. The darkness enveloped me like a heavy cloak. I lay still for a moment, trying to catch my breath, listening intently for any sign of movement above. The whispers from the park seemed to fade, replaced by an unsettling silence, as if the very air held its breath, waiting. Slowly I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. I was in a tunnel, barely wide enough for me to crouch. The walls were damp and cold, their surface glistening with moisture. I could smell the earth and decay, an overwhelming scent that made my stomach churn. My fingers brushed against the wall, feeling the rough texture of stone mixed with soil. This was no ordinary park, it was something much older, much darker. As I looked around, I realized I wasn't alone. Strange markings adorned the walls, ancient symbols that seemed to writhe under the dim light filtering through cracks in the stone. Some resembled the twisted figures I had seen above, their limbs contorted into unnatural shapes. I shuddered, the realization sinking in. These weren't just random carvings, they were a part of something far more sinister. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but it was gone, probably lost during my fall. Panic gripped me again. I was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in this underground labyrinth. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing in the distance. Determined not to let fear overwhelm me, I began to crawl forward, using my hands to guide me along the wall. Every inch felt like an eternity. The tunnel twisted and turned, and with each corner I rounded, I half expected to see the figures from the park, waiting to greet me with their gnarled, wooden faces. As I moved deeper, I noticed more of those unsettling symbols. Some depicted scenes, figures gathered around a fire, their bodies contorted in ecstatic poses, while others showed more grotesque images, dark silhouettes, twisted trees, and what appeared to be ritualistic sacrifices. My heart raced. What had I stumbled upon? Then I heard it, a faint sound like the whisper of a breeze, but it carried a tone that was both haunting and seductive. I froze, straining to listen. The whispers seemed to call my name, echoing through the tunnel, wrapping around me like a shroud. It was both inviting and terrifying, a voice beckoning me deeper into the darkness. I pressed my back against the cold stone, fear gnawing at my insides. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, hoping to dispel the growing dread. But the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, urging me to follow. With trembling hands, I crawled forward, drawn toward the sound. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, of finding a way back to the surface. But as I ventured further, the whispers transformed, weaving together in a dissonant chorus that filled the air with an ominous melody. I felt the urge to turn back, to retreat from whatever lay ahead, but an invisible force compelled me forward. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, dimly lit by flickering shadows that danced along the walls. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. It was surrounded by more of those twisted figures, their gnarled bodies forming a grotesque circle, as if in silent worship of the altar. I felt a chill creep down my spine. The altar bore deep grooves and scratches, remnants of past rituals that had stained the stone with age. I could see remnants of offerings, faded flowers and withered leaves, that suggested this place had been used for dark ceremonies. Suddenly the whispers crescendoed, overwhelming me, as if the very spirits of the park were rallying around this sacred site. I stumbled backward, heart racing, my mind screaming for me to flee. But before I could turn, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall, twisted silhouette that mirrored the very figures I had seen in the park. Its wooden limbs creaked as it moved, and I could see a face carved from bark, expressionless yet somehow mocking. The figure raised an arm, and I felt a jolt of terror shoot through me. This was not just a statue, it was alive. "Welcome," it seemed to whisper, though its mouth did not move. The word slithered into my mind, cold and forbidding. I turned to run, but the chamber felt like a labyrinth, every direction blurring together. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an oppressive energy that pulled at my limbs. I felt a deep sense of despair wash over me, as if the very essence of the tunnel was absorbing my will to escape. The figure followed, its movements smooth and deliberate, drawing closer with each frantic step I took. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped, caught between the darkness and the nightmarish reality of this underground world. As I raced for the exit, the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, wrapping around me like chains. The figures seemed to close in, their hollow eyes glowing with a malevolent light, eager for my surrender. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, I dashed toward a narrow passageway that led deeper into the tunnel. I could hear the figure behind me, its breath, a raspy sound like dry leaves rustling, echoing through the darkness. I had to escape. I had to find a way out before I became just another offering to the shadows. I plunged into the narrow passageway, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The walls pressed in on me, slick with moisture, making each frantic push forward feel like a struggle against a living organism. The whispers behind me intensified, swirling around me like a storm, urging me to stop, to surrender to the figures that had come alive in the depths of the park. The tunnel twisted and turned, branching off into other dark passages that seemed to taunt me with their endless possibilities. I could hear the figure's breath growing closer, a chilling sound that echoed off the damp stone walls, reverberating in my mind. I couldn't think, all I could do was run, driven by an instinctual urge to survive. The air grew heavier, laden with the scent of earth and decay, and I fought the rising nausea that clawed at my throat. My fingers brushed against the cold, rough surface of the walls, searching for something, anything, that might offer a glimmer of hope or a way out. I felt the shadows close in around me, as if they were alive, reaching for me with unseen hands. Suddenly I stumbled into a larger chamber, and the echoes of my footsteps bounced off the walls, the sound overwhelming in the silence that followed. In the center stood another altar, even larger and more grotesque than the last. It was covered in strange offerings, bones, dried flowers, and objects that seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy. My stomach turned, but I couldn't linger. I had to keep moving. To my right, I spotted another passageway, wider and seemingly more inviting than the one I had just emerged from. Without hesitation, I darted toward it, hoping it would lead me to safety. But the moment I entered, the air shifted. A heavy, oppressive feeling washed over me, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, each one pleading, begging, and warning. "Leave now," they cried, blending into one haunting melody. "You don't belong here." I pushed on, but the passageway narrowed as I went deeper, the walls closing in like a vice. Panic gripped me once more as I felt the presence of the figure drawing nearer, its chilling breath sending shivers down my spine. It was almost as if it were toying with me, allowing me a moment of false hope before it would inevitably catch up. I reached the end of the passageway, where the walls opened into a dimly lit alcove. A single flickering light bulb swung from the ceiling, illuminating a series of bizarre symbols etched into the stone floor. They twisted and turned, a labyrinth of lines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. My eyes widened in fear. This was clearly another part of their rituals. I glanced back, heart racing, and saw the figure's shadow stretching across the threshold of the passage, its wooden limbs creaking as it stepped into the light. My blood ran cold. It was even more terrifying up close, its face twisted into a semblance of a grin, eyes hollow yet somehow filled with malice. "Stay," it whispered, its voice a low growl that seemed to resonate in the very marrow of my bones. "Join us." I was paralyzed with fear, the very air around me vibrating with its intent. But then something in me snapped. I couldn't give in. I wouldn't let this creature consume me. I had to fight back to reclaim my agency. I scanned the alcove, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon or a distraction. My eyes fell upon an old, rusted shovel propped against the wall. Desperation fueled my movements as I lunged for it, grasping the cold metal in my trembling hands. The figure moved closer, its shadow looming large, but I didn't hesitate. "Get away from me," I shouted, brandishing the shovel as a barrier. My voice echoed in the chamber, a mixture of defiance and terror. The figure hesitated, its twisted face momentarily faltering. The whispers faded for a moment, replaced by a heavy silence that hung in the air. It seemed to reconsider, its hollow eyes narrowing as it assessed the threat I posed. Taking advantage of its momentary pause, I bolted toward the opposite wall, looking for any signs of an exit. My breath came in ragged gasps, the adrenaline surging through me, fueling my desperate flight. I was beginning to learn the layout of this underground maze, but the stakes had never felt higher. As I moved through the alcove, I noticed a faint light flickering at the end of another passageway. It beckoned me like a lighthouse in a storm, a promise of safety amid the chaos. I turned, sprinting toward it, the sound of the figure's footsteps echoing behind me like the drums of war. The passage was narrow, but I pushed myself forward, the light growing brighter with each step. My heart raced, drowning out the whispers that sought to reclaim my attention. I could feel the presence of the creature closing in, its breath like ice against my back, but I refused to look back. I focused solely on the light ahead. As I neared the end of the passage, I could see it was an exit, a small, cracked door that led to what appeared to be a forgotten part of the park. I reached for the handle, but before I could grasp it, the ground beneath me trembled. The walls shuddered, and I realized that the figure was gaining ground. With a surge of determination, I threw myself at the door, slamming it open with all my strength. I stumbled through, falling into the cool night air. The moon hung overhead, casting an ethereal glow over the park, illuminating the twisted figures still standing sentinel, watching me. But I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, racing across the clearing, heart pounding. Behind me, I could hear the echoes of the figure, its presence darkening the night, a reminder of the terror I had barely escaped. I dashed toward the tree line, the familiar sounds of the park fading as I plunged into the woods. Branches whipped against my face, the underbrush tugging at my legs, but I pressed on. I had to get away, to distance myself from the nightmare that lurked beneath the surface. But as I ran, a chilling thought struck me. The park was vast, filled with secrets and shadows. I may have escaped the chamber, but what if the darkness had followed me? What if I wasn't alone out here and the figures were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature emerging from the trees. My pulse quickened. The night felt alive with their presence, an invisible audience that held its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in their grasp, that my escape was just a fleeting illusion. With every step, I felt the weight of the whispers bearing down on me, a haunting melody that followed me into the woods, promising that this was far from over. I stumbled through the dense underbrush, branches clawing at my arms as I fought against the darkness. The chill of the night air wrapped around me like a shroud, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Every sound amplified in the silence, my breath, the rustle of leaves, and an eerie whisper that felt almost like a taunt. I could sense the presence of something sinister lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. The trees stood tall and foreboding, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I forced myself to focus, trying to remember the layout of the park, but my thoughts were a chaotic mess. Had I really escaped? Or had I merely wandered deeper into the grasp of the unknown? As I pushed forward, my mind raced with questions. Why had the figures chosen me? Was it mere coincidence, or was there something about me that had drawn them in? Each question sent shivers down my spine, intertwining with the primal fear that had taken root in my gut. I could still feel their gaze upon me, as if they were waiting for the right moment to reclaim what they had lost. Suddenly a sound pierced through the stillness, a low, guttural growl that resonated from somewhere deep within the woods. My heart stopped. I froze, every nerve ending screaming at me to run, but my body refused to obey. I strained to listen, the darkness pressing in around me, smothering any rational thought. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the crunching of leaves underfoot. I turned, my eyes wide, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, each creak and rustle echoing my panic. And then just at the edge of my vision, I saw it, a dark shape slipping between the trees, its form shifting and fluid, like smoke being swept by the wind. Instinct kicked in, and I bolted down a narrow path that had been concealed by foliage. I needed to put distance between myself and whatever was chasing me. The air grew thick with a scent I couldn't quite place, part earth, part something metallic and utterly alien. It clung to my senses, twisting my stomach in knots as I raced through the undergrowth. Every step felt like a gamble, each rustle of leaves a reminder that I was not alone. The growling intensified, now mingled with the faintest of whispers, drawing me further into the darkness. I pressed on, fueled by sheer adrenaline, the shadows wrapping around me like a cocoon. And then I stumbled into a small clearing, moonlight breaking through the canopy above, illuminating the ground strewn with fallen leaves and scattered twigs. My breath came in ragged gasps as I paused, scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. The growling had stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence that hung in the air like a dark omen. As I caught my breath, I noticed something glinting in the moonlight, a small, intricate object half buried in the soil. Curiosity piqued, I crouched down to investigate. It was a locket, silver and tarnished, adorned with strange carvings that resembled the symbols I had seen back in the chamber. I felt a strange pull toward it, as if it were calling to me, whispering secrets long forgotten. But as I reached out to grasp it, the air shifted once more. A low, resonating hum began to vibrate through the clearing, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The locket felt alive in my hand, pulsing with energy as the whispers returned, more urgent now. "Return it," they hissed, echoing through the night, a chorus of voices that seemed to swirl around me. "You must return it." Panic surged anew. The locket, was it a key to understanding what was happening? Or was it a trap, another piece of the sinister puzzle? My heart raced as I clutched it tightly, the decision weighing heavily upon me. I had to know more to uncover the truth behind the figures and the rituals that bound them. Just then a rustle came from the edge of the clearing, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. I whipped around, locket still clutched in my fist, every instinct screaming at me to hide. But where? There was no cover here, just the open space and the encroaching shadows. The figure stepped into the clearing, its form now unmistakable against the moonlight. It was one of the figures from the garden, wooden and twisted, yet somehow more corporeal, its eyes glinting with a malevolent light. The air grew colder and the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a tempest. "Why do you resist?" it asked, its voice a haunting blend of the whispers and something darker, more primal. "You belong with us. Return what is ours." I felt a surge of defiance. "No, I won't become one of you," I shouted, raising the locket like a shield. The figure recoiled slightly, but its eyes burned brighter, the malice within them palpable. "Foolish child," it growled, stepping closer, the shadows seeming to stretch toward me, eager to envelop me once more. "You cannot escape your fate. You are a part of this place now." As it moved closer, I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me. I had to make a choice, stay and confront this creature, or run, potentially back into the grasp of the unseen terror. My heart raced and I felt the weight of the locket in my hand, a potential weapon against the darkness. With a final glance at the figure, I turned and sprinted back toward the trees, the locket still clutched tightly in my fist. I could hear its footsteps pounding behind me, echoing through the clearing, a relentless predator chasing its prey. The woods blurred around me, branches snapping as I tore through the underbrush, but the locket's energy pulsed in my hand, urging me forward. I felt an instinctual pull toward the heart of the park, a place I could only hope would lead me to answers. As I fled deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like a shroud. I was running out of time. Whatever fate awaited me, I knew I had to confront it head-on. But the question lingered, could I survive what lay ahead, or would I succumb to the darkness that threatened to consume me? I ran with everything I had, my breath coming in desperate gasps as I pushed through the tangled undergrowth. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out as if to ensnare me. The darkness felt alive, pulsating with an energy I couldn't comprehend, and behind me I could hear the relentless pursuit of the figure, the creature I had only just begun to understand. Every footfall echoed in my ears, a constant reminder that I was not alone. The locket throbbed in my palm, a strange warmth radiating from it, urging me forward. I didn't know what it could do, but I hoped it might hold the key to my escape or perhaps to uncovering the truth that had ensnared me in this nightmare. The path ahead began to narrow, and I could feel the air grow heavier, thick with an unnatural tension. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, pulling me deeper into the forest's grasp. They were no longer just voices, they were a cacophony of emotions, fear, anger, sorrow, each one vying for my attention. I couldn't tell if they were warning me or tempting me into something darker. Suddenly I burst into a clearing, my heart racing as I skidded to a halt. This was not just any part of the park, it felt significant, like the very heart of the woods. The ground was bare here, a circle of dirt surrounded by towering trees, their trunks twisted and gnarled. In the center lay a stone altar, covered in moss and adorned with strange symbols similar to those on the locket. It radiated a sense of power, an ancient energy that made my skin crawl. As I approached, I could see remnants of what looked like offerings, dried flowers, bits of fabric, and small trinkets arranged meticulously around the base of the altar. My breath hitched as I realized these were remnants of rituals, perhaps remnants of those who had come before me. What had they offered to appease whatever dark force resided here? Just then I heard the unmistakable crunch of leaves behind me. My pulse quickened as I turned to see the figure emerging from the shadows. It was closer now, its form more defined, wooden limbs creaking and shifting as if it were a part of the forest itself. The moonlight glinted off its hollow eyes, which bore into me with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. "Foolish girl," it intoned, its voice a low growl that resonated within me. "You think you can hide from your destiny. This place is where you belong." I felt a surge of defiance. "I will not be a part of this," I shouted, clutching the locket tightly. "What do you want from me?" The figure paused, its head tilting slightly as if considering my words. "You possess the key," it replied, its voice dripping with a malevolence that twisted my stomach. "The locket binds you to this realm. Return it to the altar and you may find peace." "Peace?" I scoffed, stepping back, my mind racing. "This is not peace. This is a nightmare." With that I turned and ran toward the altar, my feet pounding against the earth. I could feel the figure's presence behind me, a dark shadow trailing my every step. The whispers surged, a tide of sound urging me on as I reached the altar's base. I had to confront this. I had to understand what the locket truly meant. As I stood before the stone altar, the air crackled with energy. I hesitated, the weight of the locket heavy in my hand. It felt as if it were vibrating, almost alive. Would placing it on the altar really end this? Or would it only deepen my entanglement with the darkness that lurked in the woods? A loud crack echoed through the clearing as the figure stepped forward, its movements swift and fluid. I turned to face it, the locket raised like a talisman against the encroaching dread. "Stay back," I yelled, though my voice wavered. The creature paused, its hollow eyes narrowing. "You cannot escape your fate. It is time to embrace what you are." I felt my heart race, the air around me thickening with tension. The whispers morphed into a single voice, demanding and insistent. "Return it. Only then will the cycle be complete." With a deep breath, I placed the locket on the altar, my fingers trembling as it landed against the cool stone. The moment it touched the surface, the world around me shifted. A surge of energy coursed through the air, making the ground tremble beneath my feet. The whispers crescendoed, swirling in a chaotic dance of sound and light. Suddenly the sky darkened, as if the stars themselves had blinked out. A wind howled through the clearing, whipping my hair around my face. I stumbled backward, the figure watching with an intensity that paralyzed me. The altar began to glow, the symbols etched into the stone igniting with a brilliant light that cut through the darkness. "No," I screamed, trying to pull the locket back, but it was too late. The energy enveloped me, a whirlwind of sensations that made my skin crawl. I could feel the darkness clawing at my mind, a flood of visions overwhelming me, visions of past rituals, of sacrifices made, of souls bound to this very place. And then, just as suddenly, it all stopped. The light faded, leaving me gasping in the dim glow of the moonlight. I looked around, disoriented, and saw the figure before me, its expression shifting from hunger to something akin to sorrow. "You have awakened what was lost," it said, its voice softer now, almost mournful. "But the balance remains unfulfilled." "What do you mean?" I asked, trembling. "What balance? The locket is a part of you now. To truly escape, you must choose. Either remain with us or sever the bond that ties you to this darkness." As I stood there, heart pounding, I realized that the choice before me was not just about escape. It was about confronting the truth of this place, the truths hidden within myself. I had been drawn here for a reason, and the locket, this cursed object, was a part of that reason. The figure stepped closer, its wooden form looming over me. "The decision lies in your hands. Will you join us, or will you fight to break free?" I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the moment. I had come too far to turn back now. The whispers began again, swirling around me, and I felt the weight of their collective gaze upon me. I had to choose, and the answer lay deep within me. With newfound resolve, I locked eyes with the figure. "I will not be a pawn in your games. I choose my own fate." As the words left my mouth, a deafening silence fell over the clearing. The figure stepped back, its eyes widening in shock. The wind stilled and the glow of the altar flickered as if sensing the shift in power. I could feel the locket's energy responding, a fierce warmth enveloping me. I understood now it was not just a key, it was a reflection of my own strength. I had the power to break free, to sever the ties that bound me to this dark fate. With a final surge of determination, I stepped away from the altar, feeling the weight of the whispers dissipate as I turned my back on the darkness. The path ahead was unclear, but I would forge my own way. I would not become one of them. As I fled the clearing, the figure's voice echoed in my mind. You cannot escape your fate, but I refused to let its words haunt me. I had chosen my own destiny, and I would reclaim my freedom. With the forest closing in around me, I ran deeper into the woods, the night stretching endlessly before me. I could hear the whispers fading, their urgency replaced by a sense of release. I would find my way back, and I would make it out alive. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.